Well, at 5:08 on September the 28th, 2020, the Page Unified School District special meeting will convene. And first of all, welcome all board members. Good to see you. And let's go ahead and start this off. This is a special meeting, so we'll jump right into it. And let's start with a roll call. And Dee, will you start us off? Unmute, please. Unmute if you would, please.
Dee McCary, member.
Thank you, Dee.
Desiree Fowler, board clerk.
Thank you very much. And I'm Bob Candelaria, the president of the board, and we're joined by Lynn Hoffman. And Mr. Wallen, unmute. Let us know you're here.
I am here. Good to hear you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Superintendent Wallen. And so let's go ahead and get to the business of our special meeting. And we've got a few agenda items. And the first one we'll cover is the SFB terms and conditions for the EA High School CAB mechanical power supply. And Larry, this is your, I apologize. You guys got to stop me quick because I'm ready to be over with this meeting. This is a meeting. We need approval of the agenda and a second, please.
I recommend that the governing board approve the SFB terms and condition as presented.
Okay, let me ask what we've got and I apologize to the board. I stepped past the first order of business, and that is the approval of the agenda. So I'll need a motion in a second. So you move, Ms. McCary?
Yes.
Thank you so much.
I second that motion to approve the agenda.
Thanks, Desiree. We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, good. It goes. And so, Ms. McCary, you took the lead on item A. Let's go ahead and do that. Would you state that again, please?
Yes. We recommend the governing board approve the SFB terms and condition as presented.
Need a second?
I second that motion.
Thank you. We do have a motion and a second. Mr. Wallen.
Mr. President and members of the board, this is a CAB mechanical power supply program that we thought the board was going to have to pay for, but the SFB has picked it up. And so we're following their guidelines to put that on their list so that we can be refunded through the SFB for that program. And it's in the amount of $18,645. I want to especially recognize Mr. Cody Chichili for really pushing this, because this wasn't expected that this would happen. So it's through his finesse and diplomacy that we are glad to see we get this through the SFB.
Well, I'll just add my thanks to Cody for getting this thing done. I mean, it's not a small chunk. It's $18,645, and so SFB will pick that up for us, and that's a great job. Any other comments or questions from the board? Okay, if none, we've got a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Aye.
And I see Ms. Skidman, we'll let you announce yourself, and thank you for joining us.
Hi, how are you? Sorry, I'm late.
No problem. And this is Sandra Kidman. Thank you, Sandra. All right, item B, we've got a presentation by Dr. Barrage with the Tuba City Regional Healthcare. And this is just a presentation, no motion needed. And so, Dr. Barrage, it's good to see you here, and thank you for joining us. I think you're in Tuba City, is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
All right.
Here in Tuba City.
And maybe a little bit of an introduction, how long you've been there, and again, once again, I can't express how thankful we are for you joining us this evening.
Sure. So I'm a pediatrician here in Tuba City. I've been here for 2 years. Prior to coming here, I was at the CDC for 2 years, doing a fellowship in disease outbreak investigations and applied epidemiology. And so I've been running helping to run the epidemic response team here in Tuba City since late February, early March, when things kicked off.
Wow, really appreciate you, man. It's great to have you in this region with that expertise. You talk about good timing.
Yeah, say I didn't anticipate a pandemic in moving here. But.
I know, but thank you. Well, we thank you for being here. And again, you're going to talk to us about just all the work you're doing there and how it impacts our region.
Yes, so I'm going to share my screen. So I also want to give thanks to Dr. who helped set up this presentation. I believe you can see it there. So basically, I'm going to go over some overviews of COVID. Some of this will be familiar, sort of touching on some of the trends recently and things that need to be considered as you guys are considering opening schools for in-person learning. So as you all likely know at this point, so coronavirus, otherwise known as SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19, it is an RNA virus. There is something called a spike protein that helps the virus adhere to the host cells, and that's what causes infection. And we'll come back to that when we talk about vaccines a little bit towards the end. Many of you may have heard the R0, or the signage shows as R0, and that is the infectivity of the virus. And that's if you're exposed, if one person is exposed, how many other people are likely to be infected. So basically, we want this number to be less than 1 so that the epidemic sputters out. If it's significantly more than 1, it'll continue to spread. And with COVID, we've seen anywhere between 1.4 and 5.7, which is why it is still going strong. So as you are also familiar with, symptoms commonly are fever, cough, sore throat, headache, body aches, and fatigue. Can also have nausea, vomiting, and abdominal pain, which are so can certainly be signs of COVID, but aren't necessarily what people think of. Oftentimes people have a loss of taste or smell, which is pretty unique to COVID, not seen with many other illnesses. 85% of infected people have mild or moderate disease and recover rapidly. People that have more severe disease tend to have comorbidities, and that includes higher age, diabetes, obesity, kidney or liver disease, lung disease, and immunosuppression. However, many people don't have comorbidities and still can get very sick, including sort of the younger or middle age group. Some people do have symptoms that last longer, it's called here long haulers, and that's sort of where they have symptoms for more than 2 months. And then many may also be asymptomatic and sort of have trouble believing that they have coronavirus when they feel totally fine. So as you all know, here in our American Indian population, we have been hit hard. Compared to white non-Hispanic persons, cases among American Indian and Alaska Natives has been 2.8 times higher than the white non-Hispanic persons. Hospitalizations have been 5.3 times higher, and deaths have been 1.4 times higher. And you can see it in this table compared to other minority groups, Asians, Black or African American, and Hispanic or Latino persons. So we certainly have seen these effects in the past few months. So as you recall, our pandemic here in Navajo Nation started what we call Epidemic Week 12, which is the calendar week 12. And that was on March 17th, we had our first confirmed case on Navajo Nation. Most of these initial cases tracked back to a Nazarene event in Chilchimbato, Arizona that happened the weekend of March 6th and 7th. That following weekend, there were many other chapter meetings sort of that helped seed it in the population. And then by that week of the 17th and the weeks following, we saw many cases and many ill people. So this is what we call an epidemic curve. And so across the bottom is time by week. And so these are epi weeks. So as you can see, the first week that we saw cases was week 12 of the calendar year. We're now already in week 39. And we can see that there were more and more cases in April, knowing that testing was very limited at that time. We did start to see a decline in cases in early June around week 23, 24. And then we saw a surge again when the rest of Arizona was surging. And have since seen some decline. However, there have been some worrying signs in the past week. We have increased cases here and other increased cases across Navajo Nation as well, and we'll come back to that.
Dr. Burgess, sorry about this, but when you go back to that last slide,
Sure.
is that the whole of the Navajo Nation, the 4 states, or is that just strictly the?
So this is good question. This is strictly Tuba City data.
Okay,
So
thank
Navajo
you.
Nation does also present similar curves. They now are presenting a weekly epidemic report that they do share on the schools call, which happens on Tuesdays at 1 o'clock with school leadership. And that's been very helpful. I do have some of the slides so I can show them to you in terms of the recent week, but I am just presenting Tuba City data for the most part. Any other questions right now?
Thank you.
Yep. So what has Navajo Nation done? So what are the mitigation measures that have been in place? So as you're familiar, there's mandatory masking, there's social distance, attempting to ban large gatherings, which have continued to pop up. Schools and churches have been closed. There have been curfews and stay-at-home orders. And as you're aware, the stay-at-home order was reinstated last week in response to some larger clusters and more cases, as well as the longer weekend lockdown that started this past weekend as well. Things have been limited to essential businesses and services. There's been development of other infrastructure, including alternate housing for isolation or quarantine. There have been shelters brought to homes that need more space, hand washing stations distributed, and then food, water, fuel, and isolation or kits to help people isolate and quarantine as needed. Elsewhere nearby in Hopi, there have been closure of villages to non-residents, so closely monitoring who's coming in and out, suspension of traditional ceremonies and dances, and then networks to help people when they're in quarantine or isolation, people that are under investigation or PUIs. So there's been a big focus on hand hygiene, decontamination, and sanitizing. So there's no running water in 30% of the homes on Navajo Nation. There's been use of alcohol-based sanitizers. However, early on, these sanitizers were hard to find. There's also an emphasis on bleach or using other sanitizing wipes to reduce transmission from high-touch surfaces. I think we've learned more recently in terms of the science that's been developing that high-touch surfaces are probably less of an actual transmission risk than the respiratory droplets that we think are predominantly driving transmission of coronavirus across the nation and across the world. However, it's still important to practice regular hand washing and other measures. Another big emphasis is ventilation, and this is because with more ventilation, with more air movement, there is more dilution of the virus in that space. So when in individual interactions, we recommend that people stay at least 6 feet apart, ideally masking as well, but certainly higher risk if you're spending more than 15 minutes with somebody less than 6 feet apart. We know that well-ventilated spaces, especially in the outdoors, decreases the transmission. Also recommended initially limiting access to the hospital, and we had to close a bunch of clinics for various reasons, but also did not want to promote spread in the hospital or in clinics. We also had to divert our resources to helping various new processes at the hospital, including screening, triage, testing, and then the acute care of many people who are ill. So this early identification with testing and contact tracing has been key to our efforts at mitigation. And we've had to put a lot of resources in terms of people and staff redirected towards contact tracing. Also PPE distribution, managing our PPE supplies as well. So testing, as you guys are aware, has been a challenge from the beginning. So initially there were very limited supplies of test kits. Our percent positivity in the very beginning was up to 60%, 65%, because we had so few tests. We only tested people that were being admitted and severely ill. In mid-May, we started to see more supplies available. We do have 3 different types of tests available here in Tuba City. One is a send-out PCR test. I'm looking for RNA, and that's the gold standard that goes to Sonora Quest Laboratories. We have a rapid version of that test offered by Cepheid that we can do in-house. Fortunately, those supplies are limited, so it's mainly for people that are being admitted. And then we also have a rapid test on the Abbott platform that's called an NAAT, or a nucleic acid amplification test, that is also done in-house and rapid, but also, unfortunately, both those rapid tests are not in abundance enough that we can do for every person. We do need to use a send-out test. Thankfully, our turnaround time for send-out tests has been quite fast. It's usually 24 to 48 hours for the past number of weeks, which is much faster than other parts of the country. So we've been lucky in that way. There are 2 other types of tests that we don't do here in Tuba City. I think for the most part, they're not being done across Navajo Nation either. One is an antigen test, and that looks for the presence of the virus antigens themselves. And then antibody test looks for the immune response to the infection. So it looks for 2 different types of immune response, something called IgM, which is the body's immediate reaction, or IgG, which is sort of a longer reaction. And we're still learning a lot about what these positive tests actually mean. They're not quite as reliable. They mean different things than the PCR and the NAAT tests that we are currently using. So increased testing is key. We need to continue to do a lot of testing. Once we test and identify positives, then we can direct on isolation and quarantine for the contacts and help mitigate the spread. As I mentioned, there are 3 platforms in use. And we do want to test both symptomatic and asymptomatic persons that have been exposed to anyone with coronavirus, and certainly testing anyone that's been symptomatic at all, any of the symptoms I mentioned before.
Can you address a couple of things with the tests that you've mentioned, and again with Tuba City, and if you guys if they were considering to come back into school, which test would you recommend? Because I've heard there's some issues with some of the shorter turnaround tests in terms of reliability or accuracy.
Yeah, so the antigen test is becoming more available in other parts of the country. We don't have it here yet, but that one is less reliable. It does have more false positives. I think it has more false negatives as well, and it is rapid. So it can be helpful in certain settings. I mean, it can be helpful if you use more regularly. If followed up potentially occasionally with some PCR or more reliable tests, but it's not something that we have here. Thankfully, we have sort of the higher standard tests. In terms of like opening schools here, the Abbott test and the Cepheid test are rapid. Ideally, if we had an unlimited supply of Cepheid PCRs, that would probably be my preference because it's the most accurate. Unfortunately, that supply is low and variable. So we have weeks where we have less than 10 left, and we have weeks where we have 100.
Okay.
And it just, the supply chain is totally broken. So we don't have any sense of how many we have or will have next week. Antibody tests are not particularly helpful in an acute setting because it tells you that your body has seen the infection before, but it doesn't tell you that you're actively infectious. So you may have IgM and be actually actively infectious, but it may be that you saw the virus a month or 2 or 3 ago, and your body is remembering that. So as you've probably heard across the country, people are using tests in different ways. In terms of colleges are testing some people much more regularly. It can be helpful. It can muddy the picture, but we certainly would want to test any student that has any symptoms at all. Anyone that's had any exposure, we would want to test as well.
Under what category does saliva tests come? Is that the PCR?
That's a good question. I think most of the saliva tests right now are antigen tests.
Oh, okay, okay.
Not sure if there is a saliva PCR as well.
I think that's what they use for their student athletes at ASU, but I'm not sure. Anyway, I've heard
yeah,
that.
I do think a lot of colleges are using saliva. I think they're saliva antigen tests.
Okay, thank you.
There's a Sophia platform that has that. I think there's a few others.
Okay, thank you.
So this graph shows our testing and cases over time. So again, the date is across the bottom. And the dark blue cases across the bottom are positives. The lighter teal are negatives. And so you can see these 3 tall ones are when we had our blitz testing. So there were a lot of negatives, a number of positives. Overall, we had more testing with the bigger teal bars at the end of June, early July, when the rest of Arizona was having a lot of cases. Things have decreased a little bit recently. The red line is the percent positivity. And so this is the percent of tests that are positive. So as mentioned, up in the beginning, we had up to 60% positive. Almost everyone we were testing, or many people that we were testing were positive. As we had more testing supplies, that number has come down. What is concerning is that in the past week, and this data is hot off the press, our percent positivity has increased from somewhere around 4% to somewhere closer to 7%. In Navajo Nation, that's also increased from somewhere around 4% to somewhere around 12% in the past 14 days. So these are things that we're watching closely. So what have we learned? Masking works. So masks are very important in interactions. Transmission patterns. So we know that asymptomatic cases can infect others. Symptomatic cases are most infectious 2 days prior to the onset of symptoms. So before you even know you have any illness, you are already shedding virus. And symptom-based screening can't be totally effective because of that shedding prior to symptom onset. Positive cases may have positive tests for weeks after their infection. So that PCR test can remain positive for weeks and even months we've seen, but it doesn't necessarily mean that people are contagious. And so the isolation and quarantine, currently for isolation, if you have tested positive, the recommendation is to isolate for at least 10 days from your positive test result. assuming you've had no fever for 24 hours and your symptoms are improving. So that's generally true for most anyone who tests positive. We don't recommend retesting to prove that they've turned positive. And then contact tracing and testing contacts changes the transmission. So I just want to touch briefly on vaccines. This is a whole nother can of worms, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but there are, as you've heard, 5 major vaccines in production, and they're in phase 1 to 3 trials. There's at least one COVID vaccine trial that's starting on Navajo Nation, and that is the Moderna vaccine. It's an mRNA vaccine, looking for that spike protein that helps with the transmission. And that's starting not in Tuba City, but in other parts of the reservation. There are other types of viruses that use an adenovirus vector, the AstraZeneca trial, which you may have heard about, and the Janssen trial. There's also a DNA plasmid with Electra Corporation, and that's the Inovio trial. There's inactivated virus, and then there's a protein-based with adjuvant, and that's a Novavax trial that I think is considering coming to Navajo Nation. Regardless, we don't know eventually if these vaccines will be approved by the FDA. We don't know when they're going to be rolled out. There's some optimistic estimates. There's some more realistic estimates, but it's not happening very soon, is my impression of sort of all the discussions. So I want to touch a little bit about children, because I know that this is the area that we are all concerned about. So overall in the US, there have been about 7% of the cases have been in children less than 18-year-old. Thankfully, one of the silver linings of COVID is that less than 0.1% of the deaths have been among children. Generally, children have similar symptoms to adults when they are symptomatic. So fever, body aches, headache, cough, sore throat, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. They can lose their taste or smell, but they also may be less likely to have symptoms. So there are many, many kids that are asymptomatic throughout their whole illness. And that is hard to predict exactly what that number is, because it depends on who's getting testing. And across the country, testing has been limited, especially for children. There's some question of whether younger children may be less likely to transmit COVID. Some question about data that shows that there's less forceful spread of droplets. There also is potentially evidence that they do have similar duration of viral particles and may even have a higher viral load than adults. And then the question obviously everyone asks is, why aren't kids getting as sick? I think some of the more recent, and there's lots of theories, but I think there's a pretty prominent evidence for there's less of an immune response. So that inflammatory immune response in adults can be what's making adults sicker. There's also question of other viruses that they've been exposed to. There's a question about receptors that aren't present in that as high abundance as in adults. So still a lot to learn about COVID. So I want to touch briefly, I'm guessing you guys have seen these as well. So these are the gating measures that Navajo Nation has put together. So it's looking at cases, and I'm going to go into the next slide that'll expand some of this: testing, hospital capacity, and public health capacity. So I think this table is sort of most helpful to look at. So phase 0 is this red or pink phase. Phase 1 is orange, phase 2 is yellow, and then phase 3 is green. So from March up until early August, we were in phase 0. And this is based on the trajectory of the cases, the number of cases per 100,000 over the past 14 days, percent positivity over the past 14 days. So if more than 10% is positive, contact tracing capacity, so 5 contact tracers per new case at least. And then this is sort of representative of extensive community spread, and disease risk is high, and recommending shelter in place. So we have been since early August in phase 1, which shows sort of slightly better metrics in each category. We were on the verge of moving to phase 2 2 weeks ago. Even last Monday, we were on the verge of moving to phase 2, and then there was this evidence of some large clusters. So there have been at least 3 clusters identified across Navajo Nation that have definitely raised red flags and are making us sort of reconsider, definitely not going to phase 2, and sort of watching closely to see what's going to happen. But across many, many service units, there have been increasing cases, including here in Tuba City.
Were they able to identify kind of the major cause in their tracing?
So they are looking into exactly what's contributed to these clusters. I think they've seen a number of family gatherings, so birthday parties, things like that have spread it. There initially was connection to a traditional ceremony, and a traditional healer, and sort of multiple contacts related to ceremonies, and then sort of crowded households as well, I think is still something that we're seeing. I think overall, we do worry that a lot of cases are being transmitted back from higher risk areas. So either from the Valley, Utah's been concerning recently in terms of their increased cases. Flagstaff actually is having a lot of cases more recently in Coconino County. So there's still a lot of COVID in all directions from Navajo Nation, and we are seeing people that traveled to Utah, I think that was actually related to one of these clusters, came back and spread it from there.
Thank you.
So this is just looking at numbers. So testing by Tuba City here locally, Navajo Nation, Coconino County, and Arizona. Looking at overall cases, so over 10,000 now on Navajo Nation, close to 1,500 here in Tuba City. The number of deaths across each of these, and then the percent positivity. So I think this percent positivity that here that's showing is the overall percent positivity. So all tests done ever, and some of these are repeat positives. So as mentioned before, it has been closer to 3-4% in the past month, and it is creeping up a little bit in the past week towards 7%. I think this is helpful to look at as well. So this is ranking of the states, and then if Navajo Nation were a state. So this is true as of yesterday or this morning. So Navajo Nation has actually moved up. It was down here a little bit more last week, but with the increase in cases, we're heading up. Utah's now 6th, which is not a place somewhere you want to be. It's definitely heading in the wrong direction. Arizona, Colorado, and New Mexico, or other neighboring states, are also things that we watch closely. So while we are separate, everything is interconnected given the amount of movement that happens for work and with family across Navajo Nation. This graph is looking at cases that we've seen here in Tuba City among children less than 18 years old, but looking by age. So preschoolers, elementary schoolers, 5 to 10 years old, junior high, and then high school. And this is looking by week again, that epidemic week or the week of the calendar year. Our testing of kids was extremely limited up until probably July, which is somewhere around 25, 26 in terms of the weeks. And then it varies. We're really mainly testing kids that are symptomatic or kids that have been exposed. So we're definitely not testing as many kids as adults, but we are seeing a number of cases, including 6 in the past week among kids here in Tuba City. So some conclusions in terms of the epi. So locally, we're seeing increased cases, especially compared to the 3 weeks prior. Other service units are also seeing increases. The lockdown is back in effect for 57 hours on the weekends. Shelter in place is back in effect as well. The percent positivity in Navajo Nation has increased over the past 14 days and is in a concerning phase. Consistent testing of the population will really continue to be important. We have seen sort of decreased testing numbers as less people are probably concerned. However, that has started to increase in the past week, but we do need to quickly identify hotspots, identify clusters, test all the contacts. That's an important part of contact tracing. And then considering the Page area, there can be a longer delay in getting information from Page. I think some of the testing sites in Page have a much longer turnaround time. Hopefully that's gotten better. But even once they're tested, sometimes the results go through Coconino County and then eventually get back to us. And that can be a delay of 2 to 5 days, which delays our contact tracing and can leave more time for the virus to spread in between. So for schools, key things to think about. So protocols for safe reentry. So parent and family education for screening students for illness and risk. So the CDC actually doesn't recommend doing universal symptom screening or temperature checks necessarily, because we know that kids can be asymptomatic, they can be pre-symptomatic. You're not necessarily going to catch every case that comes into school. Social distancing is really important, considering buses, cafeteria, recess, assemblies, sports, field trips. So in all the different areas, how do you keep kids distanced? Cohorting as much as possible so that if there is a case or symptomatic or an exposure, you're limiting the number of kids or staff that have been exposed to that child. Masking as much as possible, hand hygiene, ventilation, things that we've touched upon before, and then decontamination and cleaning. So there needs to be protocols in place for ill students or staff. So focusing on how do you isolate if a child ends up at school and then develops symptoms, what is the process for investigation, for testing, and then what are the criteria for closing and for quarantining children as well. So considerations for families to help keep schools safe. So I have to know what are the risk factors for my child and when should my child stay home. So certainly if there's any symptoms, is there any illness, if there's been any exposure to someone with COVID-19 or somebody who's at risk for COVID-19, have there been people traveling back and forth from a high risk area, whether it's a workplace or a college. Has my family done anything in the past 14 days that would put us at risk? So unmasked attendance at a gathering, over 10 people, whether it's family, church, traditional ceremony, those are all risk factors. Dining indoors in a restaurant with anyone in there, but especially over 50% capacity, flying or traveling, or sort of just moving around and going into high risk areas. Movie theaters certainly are high risk as well, any sort of indoor space. Also, has my child mastered behaviors to keep things safe? So can my child keep a mask on correctly in social settings? How is their hand hygiene? Are they washing their hands? And how do they understand social distancing both in and out of school? And then is the school keeping abreast of the epi data? And are they keeping families informed? So are there clear plans for alternative learning if the school is to shut down? And who are the decision makers that monitor the epidemiology at the school and are helping to make those decisions? So those are sort of, I know those are sort of high level points. I briefly was able to look at your school plan, and I'm happy to answer any other questions related to that or anything I touched upon already.
Board members, anything for Dr. Barash?
Yes, Bob, I'd be most interested to know if there's a separate count for page. Because when I look at anything in the reports and news, you'll have it as Coconino County. It doesn't break down.
So that's a good question. That would be a question for Coconino County to ask. We in Tuba City definitely don't get page numbers. So in non-Navajo Nation, we don't get all page numbers either. So we do see people that are tested in page that live on the reservation, but we don't see page specific numbers. I think you could probably ask Coconino County and see if they're able to share any page specific information with you guys.
Thank you.
Board members, anything else? Well, I will tell you, you know, the things we're considering tonight have to do with bringing back kids, and our staff has done a really good job putting a plan together, and all of the elements that you have really laid out are the important ones for us as well. So we have promised our staff and our community that we're not going to operate in a vacuum. And it's folks like you that really help us out to do that. So we really do appreciate you and providing us that information. I did have a question. Lynn, do we have her presentation?
No, you don't have it yet, but I can email it to you.
Okay. All right, good. That'd be really awesome.
Similar to the one Diana may have sent, but I did a few changes.
Right. There's a really several of the slides are really important. Just in the community when you start talking to other groups. And so that's really helpful. So I really appreciate that. Yeah. Anything else, board members? All right. If not, Dr. Barash, thank you for, yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I can quickly share, these are the Navajo Nation slides that will be shared on the call tomorrow, just so that you guys are aware.
Yeah, great.
Hold on one second. Just so you see the trends that are concerning people. So this is what's called the smooth lined curve. So as you can see, this is early May, Memorial Day. Cases were dropping. And then in the past 2 weeks, there's been this uptick of cases, which is certainly concerning. And then if you look across service units, there have been many service units who have seen increases, including Tuba City, Shiprock, Kanta, and Chinle. So I just wanted to share those graphs. And this is the percent positivity graph. So these are the tests that are being done. There have been fewer tests in the past few months as there have been less illness and less concern. But this sort of spike in percent positivity over the past 2 weeks is certainly concerning. So I think sort of, as you mentioned, things are constantly changing. You know, a week ago, probably last Monday, I may have said things are looking pretty good. This week it is a little bit of a different story, and we just don't know. It's hard to predict what's going to happen.
Right. And Dee, just to your point, on the Coconino County website, they do break page out specifically, and again, some of the things that we do face is the fact that when we make decisions, we're looking at some lagging data. And but I will say there was maybe one thing you might want to address, Dr. Barrage, is in Coconino County, it showed a really big spike. But I'd heard some things about some testing data that had finally come into the system one way or another. And so there was about 2 or 3 or 4 days in a row, they had 30 to 40 to 50 to even 60 cases or so that kind of showed up. And that drives the Coconino County numbers.
Yeah, so I think I think they've seen a lot of cases using the antigen test, and that's coming from NAU students in large part, but also Fort Tuttle is doing that same test as well. So I think they have more access to testing, which may also be leading to detection of more positives. There was a situation where a number of the students, unfortunately, they're not collecting the address or phone number on a lot of the tests right now. And they're trying to change that, obviously. But a number of the tests were sent to Maricopa County and took time to get back to Coconino County. And so that contributed to it. But yes, I was just going to try to pull up their curve, but it is definitely concerning in terms of the increases they've seen. I think I have it here. So this is actually as of last week, and I think it looks a little bit worse already.
Right.
But the spike from July, late June, early July, and then again in the past week. So we have a weekly call with Coconino County, and I asked, is this related to testing? Is it different metrics, or is it actually more cases? And her answer was that it's both. It's a change in testing, but it's also more cases that they are seeing. Gotcha.
I think the last data I saw, and this is dated probably a little bit, but in Page, we'd had maybe one case in about 14 days or something like that, and I don't know what the numbers are now, but it's been pretty decent.
Yeah, so that sounds good. Just making sure, it is true that data is always lagging. Right. It's hard to do real-time data for any of this testing given the turnaround time.
Yeah, and of course our impact and things that we'll be considering tonight really have to do with all of our chapter houses and our families there. That are impacted by everything, and again, President Nez has been really complimented on the national level for how he's really addressed very aggressively the COVID on the reservation. So props to him.
Yeah, I don't envy you. It's not an easy decision. Obviously, school is important, but this illness is very much present. So
yeah,
thank you guys once again, for considering everything closely.
Thank you so much. It's always awesome to have someone with a wealth of knowledge. So keep up the great work.
Great. Well, thank you guys. Have a good rest of your night.
Thank you. All right. We'll move on in the agenda. Item C, district reopening plan for in-person attendance. This is an action item, and let's have a motion in a second so we can have a conversation.
I make a motion that we review and discuss the information provided and take an appropriate action on reopening plans.
Thank you, Dee. Do I have a second?
I'll second that motion.
Okay, we do have a second. Thank you very much. Okay, Superintendent Wallen.
Good afternoon. Thank you. First, again, looking at all the data, and that's one piece of the data. Would like to look at the next piece of data and ask Dr. Meyer. We just did a survey last week. A week ago, Friday, we spent all day looking at our back to school plan. We have our continuous learning plan, which is one we did over the summer that encompasses everything. And now we have our back to school plan, which is very specific about where we are and where we want to go. And so with that team that met last Friday, we then set up a survey to see what parents were telling us about this and see where we can go from there. So that one piece of data I'd like to get on the table too, following Dr. Burgess's comments. Dr. Meyer.
Governing Board President, Governing Board members, Superintendent Wallen, and guests. Let me share my screen here real quick. So as Mr. Wallen stated, it was almost 2 weeks ago, we sat down as a large team and started moving through, started moving through this, hit the wrong button. Started moving through the idea of returning safely back to brick and mortar. One of the things that was made very clear was parents will still have a choice in this. So with that, we looked at who would choose to come back to brick and mortar. What this would do is give us, because the idea was set that about 50% of the students who choose to come back would be in the buildings. And so then we needed to figure out a few things around instruction, a few things around transportation and food service. And the main point was parents or guardians always had the option to remain in remote. So September 18th, as Mr. Wallen said, we had the large group gathering to go over this plan to safely return to schools. From the 18th to the 22nd, the questions were developed, the narrative was developed. The 22nd and 23rd, it was launched out every way we could. And then this past week on the 24th, 25th, and then also today, we continued to follow up with any parents who hadn't supplied their opinions on the data. So Page has about 1,392 households. So this is in reference to households. We know that our houses can hold more than one child. So in this instance, with 1,392 households, as of Friday, we had 1,005 returned to us, with about 35% saying yes, they would return to brick and mortar. About 65% said no, that they would choose to stay in remote learning. And then we needed some more information. So we were going to design bus routes to help mitigate, as you saw in that the last presentation, how many would be coming through cars and how many would be coming walking. And then another follow-up question was, if you weren't going to come back in the target date, when might you consider? And that was kind of anecdotal. It wasn't, you had to pick something, it was a free response. And so most of those responses were around second semester or 2021. So that's out there as well. But in this instance, we'd be looking at 35% of the households had selected that they would return to the brick and mortar. All right. Any questions? Okay.
Board members, do we have any questions?
I have a question. So
Yes,
that's household. How does that translate to student numbers?
So we've not done the analytics down to student numbers yet. We're continuing to collect all of the data, and then we'll start to run it into Power Schools. So when we design the groups, we can keep the groups as balanced as possible, and that'll be part of Mr. Wallen's plan or the district plan, but Mr. Wallen will be presenting it as we move forward.
Any other questions?
Thank you guys for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate your presentation. Mr. Wallens?
Okay. To bring everybody up to date, this is a discussion about a possible reopening. And I think the thing I would ask you to keep in mind is begin with the end in mind. And the end would be the end to hybrid virtual learning, so that we can move forward and begin to challenge our students. We have the continuous learning plan. You've seen that. We've talked about that. That outline, that was done over the summer, and that outlined all kinds of things, mitigation strategies and possibilities, not only in terms of the virus, but in terms of learning, the virtual learning that we put together. We have since purchased iPads for every K2 student and Chromebooks for all K3 through 12 students, along with over 650 hotspots to help students log on. And we're getting a pretty good login rate, depending on the weather, depending on the accessibility that they can get to the internet. And so with this, let me share my screen. Just a second. We put together a learning plan that looks like this. Are you seeing the back to school learning plan? Yes, okay. And so we went in and took our continuous learning plan and went down to details, and it goes into school schedules, phases, and timelines. It goes push PUSD back to school protocols, health screening protocols, sickness response protocols, signage protocols. So it goes down, like I said, to very detailed work. And it's based on 3 principles that we will establish health and wellness guidelines to help our students develop that focus on student and staff wellness throughout the year. And it talks about signs, screening, sanitation, social structures, and sickness responses. We were working very hard on putting those together. Principle 2 is to offer educational opportunities to help our students develop, which will include brick and mortar instruction on campus and or virtual options. And then principle number 3 is to offer a well-rounded educational system, food service, counseling, educational services, specialty classes, college, career readiness opportunities for our students in a safe and healthy environment. And then PUSD will engage in strong parent, student, family partnerships throughout the school year. The guiding principles will help us provide an excellent educational program. We've done that through surveys, through contact with, I'm on the radio station almost weekly. We've been running a lot of ads on the radio station to support us. And so in terms of looking at what we've been doing, since August the 10th, we've been in a virtual learning environment. Schools will hold distance learning model of instruction that we've distributed the Chromebooks and the iPads, and teachers, and thanks to the board for allowing the teachers to come in early to be teacher trainers, and then to come in early to work on lesson plans. We've had a, how would I say, a smooth, rocky transition to virtual learning. And again, it depends on how much technology that person had used before. And we're doing, our students are held accountable for their attendance, completion of assignments. We just issued progress reports last week. Grade cards are coming up in about 3 more weeks. And completion of assignments, just demonstrating knowledge and skill through benchmark assessment growth. And then staff are available all day to work with kids. In the afternoon, they have posted hours in which they're doing office visits. And we wanted to have those office hours posted so that parents and students could collectively get to those kids. Now we're looking at potentially hybrid environment. We had talked about October 5th. We've now moved that to October 12th. And when we met with our CWC, which is a local group of health providers, one of the recommendations they made is that we only bring back 50% of our kids on a given day. The other thing we discovered is that we had a shortage of bus drivers, and that seemed to meld together. So we said, okay, let's integrate students back. So we divided them into 4 groups of students that will come to school in person. So basically in this hybrid model that is targeted for October 12th, students would have 3 days a week of virtual and 2 days a week of on-site. So Monday, Tuesday, so group A and C as an example, will be in-person instruction on Monday and Tuesday. Group B and D will be instruction in person on Thursday, Friday. And I'll show you a graphic that's better, easier to understand than that. And then Wednesday would be an all-day virtual day, and an all-day where we would also be cleaning and restocking and putting together stuff for families. And during this whole time, it's important to understand, and I say it over and over and over again, and remind me to keep repeating it, that you can always come in virtually to your student's class. And you can always continue your academic learning virtually. One of the things when we do come back, there will be a waiver that needs to be signed and so on. We have, under the governor's order that fits with this also, we have instituted on-site support for students. And there's about 70 to 100 students that are participating in that program daily. They report to the gym. They go through a screening process. They then go into the gym and they participate in their classes online from the gym. And we keep growing a little bit more every time. We've now added the way for them to get their meals and so on and so forth, so that they are not only studying, but they can also have meals to eat and that prospect. Then eventually, ideally, one of these days, we would come back to a traditional school, which would be a 5-day school week. It says 4-day, but it'd be, well, it could be a 4-day week if we keep Wednesday as the mitigation day, where we do the deep cleaning. So potentially a 4-day week, and always look at traditionals with some questions in mind, because we're never going to go back to the way we were. That's not going to happen. We're entering a new world in education, and that is important to understand that the old environment is gone, and we need to move on. And we recognize that may be polarizing and there may be strong opinions about it, but school is not going to go back to the old ways that it was. We continue to work with Coconino County Health Department and so on and so forth, and do health protocol screenings. So when students come back to school, they will have health protocol screenings. And we're going to do a major blitz on self-reporting of sickness. It really requires each of us to take up our civic responsibility and monitor ourselves. We are right now, as employees, getting daily temperature checks. We keep a daily log. Toward the end of this week, we'll be going to an online daily temperature checks and log, so that we can track what's happening. And important is also the self-reporting of sickness. Catch it at home before you come to school. And so, and we'll do, prior to getting on the bus, we'll be doing some work with that, getting information out, looking at that aspect of self-care, containment, and transmission. Temperature checks being one of the things that will happen minimally once a day. And so this plan goes on through all the protocols that we have established, the hand washing, visual screening, all those pieces. So it's important to know that we have been working very hard to put that together and make that work. And then as a result of that, we were then asked to create let me switch sharing here just a second. Stop sharing. And now let me start sharing again. We have put together a checklist from last Friday that goes into even more detail. We are starting to schedule completed detailed schedules. And one of the things, if we return on October 12th, we are proposing to return full time. So it'll be a full day of school. So schedule completed. So this just gives you the idea of all the details that we are constantly checking. We have timed out staff training specifically completed before we returned to school, COVID response team training. So one of the questions was, what happens if someone is suspected or is positive? There's a response team at each site that will respond to that. And I'll show you a picture of what that looks like in more detail. But again, all the protocols are in place and scheduled as we go through and evaluate those and so on and so forth. So we've done a lot of work with that and are continuing to meet. We'll meet tomorrow afternoon and we'll be working together with that as well. So what we are proposing that you think about, let me get to the right. Well, let me go to that one first. Let me stop sharing and then share with you again. As an example, this is the Desert View Return to School plan that each of the school will have. And so here is their COVID response team that's identified. And then the student arrival, pickup, drop-off procedures. And this will all be mailed out once the board has made a decision and see where we're headed, so that we can then put this together. How they dismiss, lunch in the classroom, signs. There'll be signs and signs and more signs, traffic flow patterns. All this kind of stuff is being put together to give as strong a mitigation as we can to that. Now, let me go to the, so that's an example of one of the school's plans. So I'm going to stop sharing. I need to stop sharing and start sharing again. So give me just a second. So this is what I put together. You should be seeing, it should say page at the top. Is everyone seeing that? So again, thinking about October 12th as a possible return to school date for 50% of the students. And based on our survey, it looks like that might be about 30% of the students. So instead of there being 12 kids per classroom, that could end up being 5 or 6 kids per classroom. The other kids would all be coming in virtually. So there's, that's something to consider in this big piece. So first of all, everyone has just been tremendous. I want to offer my thanks to the students, staff, parents, and community members who are helping us succeed in this period of remote learning. And in remote learning is a totally new educational environment. I'm sorry I have to say that, but it is. It's totally new. And most importantly, the impact is on parents because now you are the teacher. We've always used to say parents are the first teacher. You're definitely the first and continuing teacher at this point because now you have to learn a whole new system of activities at home to prepare that student for scheduling. I had a conversation with 2 parents yesterday in which we were talking about what that home environment looks like. And they said, well, my kid sits at the kitchen table and is logged in. My 2 boys sit at the kitchen table and they're logged in. And when she described it, I said, oh, well, you need to think about that. She said, I was over cooking dinner. If you're cooking dinner and they're sitting at the table, there's all kinds of distractions. And then we have a video that we put out there showing a dog running around and all kinds of things. So it's it's extremely important in the virtual world that you set a school-like environment for those students to work in. That means they need a designated place, they need a designated chair, they need a quiet place away from stimulation. One parent I talked to the other day said, oh, my son, he logs in while he's laying on his bed. And I said, no. Because what happens when we lay on our bed, we're very tempted to fall asleep. We're very tempted to roll over. We're very tempted to get distracted. So it's very important that you allow and create that opportunity for students to have that school experience. And that school experience is in your environment now. It's different. So that's something that's really, really important in that virtual environment. So we're pleased to define, as we pause to define our plans for reopening our schools, we must consider what school would look like as we move forward with a hybrid model to restore some form of in-person learning. And there's a lot of school districts throughout Arizona. They're now opening up with this hybrid learning model. We are working diligently to create a quality and meaningful learning experience for our students while ensuring that we maintain a safe environment and put forth a model that our professional staff can execute. We must also anticipate that there may be outbreaks and creating cycles through which we will move from in-person to remote learning for some time. And we're hoping that doesn't happen. And according to the guidelines that we have mitigation strategies, and we must have 2 or more laboratory confirmed cases before we would begin to move forward. On June 22nd, I issued a procedural directive about emergency measures reporting requirements for schools, and that we are required to report to the county health department. And they have a, I guess what you call a SWAT team, a COVID team, that would immediately begin to work with us and do the tracing and begin to consider those kinds of things. So, so seeing that the consideration of a reopening model may be an incredible experience, it's all right to think about the educational system we now left behind. We recognize that some of the concepts might be polarizing. There may be some strong opinions about the path before us, but we must remain open to what's possible and consider all options to move forward. We're compelled to shake off our hesitations, put forth our very best thinking, and courageously take action. I am in weekly contact with the Coconino County Health Department. As Dr. Barrage says, I attend a weekly meeting with the Navajo Department of Identity Education, in which we do exactly what she described. We look at the numbers, we talk about the issues, we talk about where we are. We're in constant contact with the Coconino County Superintendent's Office. We do a every 2-week community wellness check and looking at where we are there. And then we're also receiving constant dates from the Department of Health Services. So to move us forward and focus on building our B district, we are looking at the possibility of asking the board to consider a remote and in-person learning for our students. And so we want to, remote is where we are now, and that's in synchronous learning, and then the asynchronous learning is in the afternoon when students can go in person and look at that. We are wanting to give consideration to move to a hybrid model. In-person opportunities will look a bit different. So in the hybrid model, it would be 2 days on site, 3 days virtual, 2 days on site, 3 days virtual. And there'll be some time spent with focused instruction and moving forward. So in the document I gave you is a reopening model. Let me pull that. Let's see, I have to stop sharing first. Then let me pull that up. Oops, sorry. What that would look like. And let me share that. So what we're talking about, asking the board to consider the possibility, and please understand that if the metrics continue in the way that they've been discussed, then the possibility of us opening is not good. So we would reconvene a board meeting before we got to that October 12th. But October 12th is our target date. So we are looking at a hybrid schedule: Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And it'd be a normal school day, Monday, Tuesday. So AC groups would be on site. And so that would be about, based on the survey, would probably a third of the 50% that we had targeted. And then B and D groups would be logging in virtually to your classroom. So teachers would have on-site and virtual being offered at the same time. Wednesday would be all virtual, and we'll probably run on the half-day schedule again with afternoon for office hours and working individual with students. Thursday, Friday, the groups switch. So it goes on site from virtual. So that's kind of what the model looks like. And then the groups are contained on there. Let me see if I can.
Mr. Wallen, can I interrupt?
Yes.
Can I ask all of our guests and board members to mute their computers? Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Wallen.
Okay. And so then the groups, so for example, A group will be all students who ride buses from Highway 89, Route 16, and 21. And that would be A group, and that'd be 492 students. And then B group, or C group would be their patriots, would be in town Page, and that would be the students who live north of Arrow Street. And that's about 675 students if we were fully. So in the 50% model, it would be half of those A group and B group that would be in school. Based on the survey, it could be 30% of the A and B group that would be on site. I'm sorry, A and C group. Then B and D would be the next group, and that would be Thursday, Friday. And then it would continue like that weekly. So
Hey.
that's what the hybrid model looks like.
I have a question for you.
Answer. Sure.
I have a question. Out of the amount of families that have participated in the survey, do we know the demographics of where the families or students are coming from? So we have a better idea of how many students are going to be attending classes?
Terry, are you still on? Because he's the one who has the survey data.
So we do know who's responded. We also know the households. Today is technically the last day to kind of clean up the data. It's going into Power Schools right now. So then we'd be able to run the reports so that we would be able to see exactly which teachers would have which students in their classes. So that's all forthcoming right now, but right now it's about 35% of the households said they would elect to return to on-site learning.
So remember that number of 35%. Remember that there is as Dr. Burgess talked about, a stay-at-home order on the Navajo Nation. And so those kids can attend by choice. Myself as superintendent in Page, superintendent in Flagstaff, superintendent in Holbrook and Winslow have all been working with the Department of Diné Education about what that would look like for our students. And basically it comes down to choice. And remember, that's always the choice. You could have 5 days of virtual if you want, based on this model. And that sounds like there's going to be about 60% of the kids that are going to be virtual all day long. And so those are the pieces to think about in relation to the recommendation. We are asking the board to consider a start date of October 12th. We had originally had it October 5th, but October 12th is our target date. And so that fits in with where we're headed in relation to the groupings and so on and so forth. We now have enough bus drivers to run buses on that hybrid schedule, and we'll continue to work to grow bus drivers to make that happen. That's the big piece.
I have
And
a
during
question.
during this time, there's no sports as well. This is strictly 8 to 3 learning.
Can I ask a question?
Go ahead, Sandra. Sorry.
Well, that's okay. Thank you so much. So here's my confusion. I don't understand how that hybrid schedule works in practice. Because right now kids are attending school from 8 to about 12:30, depending on their schedules. And then after that, it's office hours. Are you telling me that the teachers are going to have the same kids in their classrooms they have right now, and some of the kids are going to be in the classroom with them? And then, but they're going to be in the classroom with them till 3 o'clock. So is virtual learning going to be from 8 to 3 and not on Wednesdays? It doesn't make a lot of sense to me right now.
There will be 3 days of virtual learning and 2 days of on-site. So I don't know, do you live north or south of Arrow?
No, that's not my question. My
I'm sorry.
question, yeah, my question is, right now, if you are in virtual learning, you're in school from 8 to 12:30. And then presumably the asynchronous learning, you're doing your assignments from 12:30 to 3. So how does that work on a daily schedule when now kids are there from 8 to 3?
That's a very good question. So what that would look like, let's say K-5 an example, because I met with K-5 teachers the other night. It might be that 4 of the teachers are on-site teachers. Well, based on the numbers, probably not. 3 of the teachers would be on-site teachers, and 3 of the teachers, let's say in first grade, would be virtual teachers. So there would be some reorganization at K-5 level. At 6-8, it's a little more difficult because they move classes. So that schedule is yet to be worked out. But yes, if you are on site, you would be in those classes, and then virtually you would be joining those classes. But you'd
Okay.
be getting an hour of instruction versus 30 minutes of instruction.
Okay, so you're telling me those teachers are going to be in-person teaching and remote teaching at the same time?
That's one way to think about it, yes. But basically, they're going to be virtually teaching. Even the students who are on site are going to log into their computers, open up their screen, and go to their Chromebook, their Google Classroom, or their Seesaw while they're on site. So everybody, including the ones coming in virtually, would all be on site. Just like if you joined if you joined an online class, it would be the same way.
So the kids aren't actually in the teacher's classroom?
Some of them may not be. They may be joining virtually, yes.
So what's the benefit of coming to brick and mortar if I'm just gonna sit at the school and actually not be in my teacher's classroom?
Well, if you come to brick and mortar, you will be in your teacher's classroom and you'll get direct
Okay.
instruction and direct contact with that teacher.
While they're also doing virtual with the other students.
Right. Everybody would be involved in this. It's just the same activity as it would be if you were in the regular classroom altogether.
Okay, so what are they gonna be doing from 12:30 to 3 o'clock?
Well, remember, we're back full time. So the schedule will be for those kids that are on site would be continuing on. They could get more direct instruction, enrichment, reteach, specials, and so on that the virtual kids may not get.
Okay, so what if my kid, okay, so I'm gonna give you a scenario right now. I have some of my children, some of my students who get their assignments like at 12:30 and then they're done by 1:30. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I just find it really strange that we would choose to go from 8 to 3 and then mess up kids' teachers, because I feel like it's been really hard for kids to connect to their teachers virtually. And then when you're saying, well, they might be having other teachers all together, that would be like restarting from scratch. I've seen that happen to some of my kids where they, after 6 weeks of 3 or 4 weeks of finally getting the hang of things, boom, they got a new teacher. And now it's all starting all over again. So I'm not quite sure what the benefit is to being in school till 3 and rather than letting school out at 12:30. I don't know, I'm not sure. I guess that's what I'm
That's a
trying
very
to
good question. And
understand.
that's a very good question. And remember, this is all new. So it's all new to everyone, not just, to parents. This is all new to teachers as well, and how we put that together. At some point, we have to go, at some point, we should be going back to full time where everybody's in school. This is a hybrid model that could possibly run a month, could run all the way till December, and then January we start back full time with all students in school. So there's different ways it can go. This is a bridge between the virtual and going to full brick and mortar. And you're correct. That's a challenge. Absolutely. You still there?
Yes.
Okay.
Do we have any other questions? I know Dee just stepped out.
So you probably need to stop the meeting.
Yes, let's go ahead and
Take a break.
take a break. We'll be back momentarily.
And Sandra, that's a really good question. I understand what you're saying. And there's pros and cons to all of it.
Dee, are you ready? All right, we're going to go ahead and continue our board meeting. (6:22). Does anyone else have any questions for Superintendent Wallen?
I do.
Yes, Sandra.
So let me just understand this. If I vote for going back to brick and mortar, does that vote include the approval of this hybrid model?
If let me share my screen with you. If you go to the letter I put in your board packet, let me share my screen again now. I'm going to the bottom of the page. Hold on just a minute. There it is. I gave you 3 recommendations. One is to open a school in a hybrid model starting October 12th, 2020. There'll be 4 groups of students maintaining the 50% on-site participation. And again, reminding you that our survey indicates that that could be at 30%. There will be a combination of on-site and remote learning activities. Wednesday would be a remote learning day to allow for deep cleaning and restocking of supplies. Parents may choose to continue their children in remote learning every day, but this will be the hybrid model. Another possibility is continue in the remote learning model for the remainder of first semester and continue the half day. A third possibility is continue a remote model for the first semester and have the remote model be a full day schedule. So 1 is the hybrid model. 2 is to continue what we're doing for the first semester at the half day, or continue virtual learning for first semester and moving to a full day schedule. So there's 3 possibilities. Number 2 would be maintaining the current practices for the remainder of the semester. And number 3 would be maintaining the current practices, but going full day schedule. And number 1 is the remote. I didn't make it easy on you, I'm sorry. It's an extremely difficult decision, as you well know.
Well, I just don't understand. I just don't see how that hybrid model can function well with the half full day and half day. I don't know. I just struggle with that.
Well, then you could continue your kids in the remote model and see where it goes from there as an example. At some point, we're going to have to transition. It doesn't have to be now, but at some point, we're going to have to transition to full time, potentially.
Mr. Wallen, I have a question. Are you through,
Yes.
Sandra? I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, my question is, since the delivery is going to be done by the teachers, on these questions, are they aware? Which ones are they looking at? Would be, this is also new, and being a new teacher and learning all the different process, which one would be the most transitioning for the teachers and the students? Because they're the ones that have to do the delivery of instruction.
Well, that's what everyone is gearing up for, and that's why I showed you like the Desert View plan where they have the triage team and everything set up for the location of the kids coming in. And that's part of the where did it go? That's part of this plan.
Okay.
Where we're going into the details of what that would look like. And so from there is going to be, it's an adjustment. It's a big adjustment for everyone to move forward. And there's just Sandra too, and there's no magic about October 12th. We had originally targeted October 5th because that was the beginning of the semester quarter. And then we backed it up a week because that week of October 5th is parent conferences. And then there's a professional development day on October 9th so that we could continue to prepare.
Okay, I have a few more questions, if I may.
Go right ahead, Sandra.
Thank you. So give me a little background on how this hybrid model was developed. Was it a committee? Who was on the committee? How much input did the teachers have on this hybrid model?
This was all the administrators, directors, ELL, SPED, everybody in that group. We put this together.
What was the input from the teachers that actually have to, teach remotely and in person at the same time?
I met with a teachers group, I want to say Thursday, or about 10, 11 teachers. Some were okay with it. They wanted to get their kids back in front of them. One person specifically was going, oh my God, I got to teach on-site and remote at the same time. I don't know if I can do this or not. And we committed to more professional development to work forward with that. I think the general theme is that they're wanting to get their kids back to school in front of them, if that's at all possible, and begin looking at that. Is that 100%? I don't think so. But is there 100% for staying remote? I don't think so.
Okay, one more question.
Sure,
So,
good questions, thank you.
How are checkout procedures now? Like, for example, I saw that there's absolutely no visitors and that kind of stuff, understandably, because of the increasing, we'd have to check everybody, blah, blah, blah. But like if you were to check out your child from school before 3 o'clock, are those procedures staying the same? How does that work?
I don't think they're staying the same because you would need to call ahead, and then they would locate that child and have him at a point where you could check him out. Yes, but it would be
Okay.
everything. There'll be no visitors, no one walking around campus, that kind of stuff. On the brick and mortar part, I'm looking to see if it said we had anything in there about that. We did not. So it would be the same procedure, except it'd all be by appointment, just like it is right now. But also there would be no visitors to campus either during those times.
So presumably you would call the office, tell them when you want your child checked out, and then show up at the office at that time?
Probably they would want you to meet them at the car.
Okay.
I'm looking for, I wanted to go back to Desert View's plan that I had here. And see how they had put it together.
Mr. Wallen, I have a question for you.
Sure.
With the presentation that was given to us earlier and knowing the current state of our numbers as they are rising here in Arizona and also with the Navajo Nation and currently with the Coconino community or county, do you feel comfortable opening school September 15th or
October 12th?
12th, I'm sorry, yes, October 12th.
With the mitigation strategies that we have in place, yes. It would not be, I'm not jumping up and down about it, but we've got to start somewhere to get back to some type of education that's going to give kids an opportunity to grow. And, and again, we are, myself, like I said, and Winslow, Page, and Holbrook are all talking to Division of Dene Education, and it came down to really saying that the decision making is really the parent. You can always choose to stay home, and we work with you along that lines. Once you do that, we work with you to stay that way, and then we will work with you to transition back to school. But if we don't offer like a hybrid schedule, for example, to get kids back to school, there'll never be any transition in relation to that.
So basically you're saying, so, okay, I guess then I have another question. I hope I didn't interrupt anybody.
You're good, Sandra.
Sorry, thank you. So you're saying it's the parents' decision whether they send their kids to school or not, whether they stay remote or not. We're just trying to start people getting comfortable with coming to brick and mortar again. So for example, if my kid is scheduled, say Monday, Tuesday for brick and mortar learning, but they don't show up and choose instead to be there virtually from their home, will that affect attendance? Will my kid be considered absent? How will that work? I know that's very detailed questions, but it's,
No, that's a really good question. And you started out with your answer was in the no, attendance is not optional. You would either commit to virtual, or if the board moves us into the hybrid model, you would commit to virtual all the time, or you would come to hybrid 2 days a week and stay virtual 3 days a week. But you could not opt out of the full attendance schedule. You always have the schedule to stay virtually.
But so what? Okay, I guess I just don't. I guess I just don't quite understand, because let's say I choose to go brick and mortar, and then one day my child, I'm like, oh, I'm not sure if they're sick or not. Why don't we just attend virtually instead? That's not an option?
No, you could do that. Yes. It's just you couldn't, you said no attendance. You have to do one or the other. Yes.
Oh, okay. But okay, no, that, I guess I misspoke then. What I meant was, like, if I choose to be brick and mortar, but I have some days where I don't show up brick and mortar, I come virtually instead, then that's okay.
Sandra, sorry to cut you off, but you're fading in and out.
Your internet connection's off a little bit. So if you unmute yourself and start again. There you go.
Oh, I'm sorry.
There you
Yeah,
go.
everything froze up. Sorry, everything froze up while I was talking, I think.
Yeah, go back and start your question.
Welcome to virtual learning, right?
Mhm.
Everything freezes up sometimes.
That's right.
That's my kids had those issues today. I guess my question was, if I choose brick and mortar as a parent, and then I decide that I can't show up any particular day, brick and mortar, which will only be 2 out of the week anyway, it's still okay for my kid to show up virtually, because that's considered attendance, right?
Correct.
Okay.
And that puts a whole new definition on getting, feeling sick at home, where before you stayed home, but I could have a cold as an example and stay home and log in virtually.
Right. So I mean, that's what I guess that's what I'm asking,
Yeah,
is because you have
that's
more
a possibility.
options. You have more options now. You're not actually losing school. It's, over maybe a runny nose or a cough or something that may or may not be COVID at all. So
correct. But if you had those symptoms, we definitely would want you to stay home.
right. Okay. But that's not going to count against attendance.
Correct.
Not being there. As long as I'm there either in person or virtually, then I'm considered in school. Okay.
Correct. Whole new world.
Yeah, I just feel for the teachers that are supposed to handle both. Yeah, that's gonna be interesting. I don't know how you can give enough attention to in-person kids and kids online, but like you said, I guess we're in a new world. I don't know.
Well, remember, if the numbers, potentially they would have 50%, so you'd still have half. Based on the survey, if it's only 30%, then you'd have 30% of your kids, which could be, like 10 kids could be down to 5 kids. So you'd have 5 kids virtually and 10 kids I'm sorry, 5 kids brick and mortar and 10 kids virtually, but they would all be logged into Google Classroom on a daily basis. And everyone would be involved in that same lesson, the same way to do that. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of variations come out of this as teachers get into it and work for it. I know my nephew in Alabama goes to school 2 days a week, and he goes on YouTube 2 days a week. And that's how they're doing it. So there's just, it's up to what is best practices and what we can push forward as an educational environment.
I would like to ask a question. If there is an outbreak, I mean, just kind of listening to our NAFIS conference, for an example, as we were put into small group discussions, I was in a group with an individual from California, also Oregon, and Wyoming, myself, and there was two of us from Arizona. And a school in Idaho had the principal there was in our little discussion, but he did mention, I am going to be in and out, and I'm dealing with an outbreak and having to put 2 of my classrooms into quarantine and just kind of taking care of the situation. I know that you did mention that you do have a plan, and for me, safety is a priority, just not just for our students, but also for our staff as well too. And that is just where I really sit back and think about safety for everyone, but more so, especially with our students and our families that are traveling in from the reservation. But that's just my intake on all of COVID. So you did share some of your information, but I guess what's the plan if we do have an outbreak?
That's in the back to school plan that I put together, that the team put together. I didn't put together, the team put together based on our continuous learning plan. And so one of the topics in there is health screening protocols and sickness response protocols. On page 10 is sickness response protocols, talking about visual screening, isolation room, parent contact, and physical distancing. And I was trying to bring back up the Desert View proposal, because every school will have a triage team consisting of 3 to 4 people, and they will be the ones who respond to that suspected case, or it's always going to be a suspected case, because it has to take a medical provider to say it is a really strong case. And so we would be responding to that. The way the metrics are right now in the from Coconino County, let me pull that over. If it is outbreaks of COVID-19 are defined as 2 or more laboratory confirmed COVID-19 cases among students within a 14-day period, or staff with onsets within a 14-day period who are epidemiologically linked, do not share a household, and were not identified as close contacts of each other in another setting during standard case investigations or contact tracing. That would be the definition of an outbreak. So if we had that happen, it's not going to be, we have a kid or staff member who's a confirmed case today. That means confirmed by a regional laboratory. Then we would be looking at what's the number of cases within that 14-day period, and are those cases linked? And so we will be working with our health providers to tell us those kinds of things. And we are required by Arizona administrative statute to report current staff, faculty, students, and students' parents and guardians if an outbreak due to COVID-19 occurs within the population of the school within 24 hours of confirming such information. and provide regular updates on their activities to keep current staff, faculty, students, and parents safe. And if you've been watching the news, there's been 3 schools I know of in the Valley that have notified their parents they had confirmed cases, but they did not close down because it didn't meet that definition as I brought that I read earlier.
Thank you for sharing. Anybody else have any questions? Sorry, I'm playing with my screen here, trying to get everyone. Okay. Well, appreciate the presentation, Mr. Wallen. We
Are
do
you
have
ready
a
to-
motion.
Well, you have a motion. I would suggest you put that motion back on the floor and read it again so everybody knows what it looks like. Because remember, I've given you 3 options. First one is going to hybrid. The second one is to continue remote learning for the remainder of the first semester and continue for half days, or continue remote learning model for the first semester, moving to a full day schedule. So you have 3 choices. And I'd suggest you ask Lynn to read the motion.
Oh, I'm sorry,
back.
Lynn. Lynn, can I get you to read the motion, please? Because I believe Bob had taken that motion earlier and he had to step out due to.
Well, I believe the motion that Dee made, hold on a second. Can you?
And this is one of the most difficult decisions you're going to make, guys. I've never in my career of 35 years in this been in a position where you have
What do you
to
want me to
face
do?
such a difficult decision.
Okay, I believe the motion that was made earlier was just a motion for the board to consider and discuss the options and to make a decision if appropriate. You can let that motion fail and then make a new motion. There was a motion and second on that.
Okay. All those in favor?
Well, okay, that makes no sense though, because it was a motion to discuss and possibly
Consider.
make an appropriate decision. So I guess we're at the stage where we need to make an appropriate decision. And
Or that.
because we can't really vote to discuss or make an appropriate. I guess we can vote on appropriate decision, but that makes things even more complicated. So I guess what needs to be done is that somebody makes a new motion and picks a model, and I would ask Mr. Wallen, what is your recommendation?
Well, first, in terms of your motion, you would need to vote to deny the motion and then make a new motion. Don't you think?
Yeah, but what is your recommendation of the 3 models so we have an appropriate decision to make?
Okay, my recommendation is to move to the hybrid model starting October 12th, with the understanding that if the metrics continue as they are, that we would not do that. And I would reconvene you and bring you that information.
Okay.
Always safety is first. And if the metrics continue, remember the metrics are always 2 weeks behind and it's 4 weeks. So we, if they don't change, then it may be that that's not going to happen. But if we don't have a target date, we won't have a point at which to make a decision or not.
So one more question. So we'd be approving October 12th, or would we have to continuously come back and make new votes on new opening dates, or is that just then per your decision to delay brick and mortar?
That would be if you put that into your motion. Yes, it could be that. Because I'm not going to, if I have to come back and convene the board or I have to make the decision, I'm not going to open the school when safety is not clear.
Right, but you could, I mean, you could always delay the decision without
Exactly.
our permission. But I guess my question then is, if we give you permission starting October 12th to reopen schools, then you can just delay that. We don't
If
have
they-
to reconvene.
Correct. If the
Right.
metrics are not support, yes, I would
Okay,
confer with the board president and say, look, these metrics are not good. It's too risky.
okay.
Thank you for your recommendation. Dee, you made the motion earlier. Are you comfortable with us making the appropriate action?
Yes, I am.
Does anybody want to put forth their appropriate action?
Yeah.
So are you saying that you want to have a motion to go with option 1 to open school in a hybrid model starting October 12, 2020, or as soon as the metrics indicate is safe if it's not on that date? And that's a decision that you will leave in the hands of Mr. Wallen.
Or you can choose 2.
Or, yeah, 2 or 3. I just thought.
Yeah.
Are we just waiting for a motion?
We are waiting for a motion.
Does that mean neither one of you wants to make a motion?
That's a good point. Then your motion dies for lack of a motion or a vote or something.
Are we are we comfortable with what Lynn just got through reading to us on the proposed motion? If so, we can pick up her statement that she made.
Lynn, you want to read that statement again for clarity?
So you'd be looking at making a motion to open school in a hybrid model starting October 12th, 2020, or as soon thereafter as the metrics indicate is safe.
Yes.
Okay, well then I'll second that motion.
Okay.
A motion was made by Dee, second by Sandra. Hold on, let me do this over. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
What was your
Desiree.
vote, Desiree? Desiree, did you vote?
I am still trying to think of, well, not trying, but I'm 50-50 with this.
It's a difficult decision,
It is a difficult decision. I mean,
and you should vote your conscience. And the safety of the kids. Those should be the two major considerations.
definitely. I mean, it's the safety of the kids.
Well, but only kids that want to go come back
Yeah,
to brick
only
and
kids
mortar
that
will go
want to
back.
go. And it's up to the parents to decide. And it's in the parents' hands, so I vote yes. Oh, all in favor, sorry, can I see your hands? Aye,
Aye.
Aye.
aye, got it. So motion passed. Okay, moving along. We have adjournment of the board meeting. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
And make a motion, we adjourn.
I second that.
At 6:51 p.m. Motion was made by Sandra, second by Dee. All in favor say aye.
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 All right. Thank you, Mr. Wallen.